Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. This is Lori Smith on Blog Talk Radio. I'm happy to be here. It's 9:30 p.m. Calgary, Alberta time, April the 5th, Monday night, and it's just awesome to be here. This is Child Abuse Prevention and Human Rights Abuse Prevention is Up to Us. We're on for half an hour, and we're looking again at the Survivor to Thriver workbook. We're in step 12. We were just finishing up step 12, I believe, yesterday morning. Yeah, and we're going to move right into step 13 and take a look at that. It's quite a large step, so that might take up most of the show. But I'm happy you could be here. This is you can find this Survivor to Thriver workbook at it's the ASCA Adult Survivors of Child Abuse. That is www.ascasupport.org, and you can go right to their website and pull this Survivor to Thriver workbook up. They have it's for anybody who wants to look at it. It's free, and they do suggest that you go through the safety first portion of it first, and I did. We did that on the show probably about, I don't know, it could be 4 weeks ago now. We've been on this subject for a long time because this workbook is 115 pages long, and we're on page 94. So that just tells you it is a really extensive workbook, and it's a great workbook, and I plan on doing it like myself, sometime later when I have time, later this spring or this summer, just going through the whole workbook myself and really doing the workbook. And it's a great workbook for survivors. It's I find it to be very helpful and just a lot of good information, really to for self-affirmation and just to learn that we did not deserve the abuse that we suffered as children, and that we have to learn how to look at things differently, to learn to look at things in the big picture and put it where it belongs. And they actually suggest that we go through this workbook in a group support, or if you have someone in your life, for instance, a counselor or therapist that it's been really working out for you, we can do this workbook with them. And if you haven't come far enough in your healing and you're just starting out in your healing journey, they actually suggest that you don't do the workbook on your own because it can trigger you. And as a survivor of child abuse, we have to be really in charge of our healing. We have to know where we're at and how far and how fast we want to move, and sometimes we want to move a little faster than because we want to heal, and so we think, well, no, I can handle this. But actually they say it's better to move at a slow and steady pace and not rush it, because we sometimes want to just hurry up and feel better. And so we just rush through things, and sometimes that can cause us to regress in our healing. So they were really, in this first chapter, it's called Safety First. The first chapter is 34 pages long, or something like that, 34 pages long. It's called Safety First, and they really suggest that you go through that. So it's not a professional show. I'm not a professional counselor or therapist. I have no certificates in this area. I'm a survivor of child abuse. I study human rights, child rights especially. I'm very interested in survivor issues because I'm a survivor. And so I just figured, I didn't know if we'd cover this whole workbook, but as we started going through it and I started looking at it, I thought this is so helpful for people who have dealt with child abuse in their lives, and it really helps to sort of put things in place, and it's helping me. So I would hope it's helping other people. And so, it's not a professional show. It's not meant to replace professional help. And so, please listen at your own discretion. If you feel like it's making you uncomfortable, just turn the show off. You will not be hurting my feelings whatsoever. I'm a big proponent that we have to be responsible for what we listen to. And if something's bothering you, just turn it off. It's your prerogative and your choice. And I wouldn't hold that against anybody. If you're a young person under the age of 18, this show is really about children, about child abuse. But some of the topics are really mature, and some of the topics are kind of scary because abuse is scary. And if you haven't heard a lot about it, it can be kind of frightening, and you might have questions, and you wouldn't maybe know where to get help. So I really ask that you get an adult to listen to the show with you. It's so important. And you want to, I would hope and pray you have a parent in your life that would listen to this with you, just to help you make the decision on whether or not you should be listening to this program. And also, anything you're doing online, you want to have someone know who you're talking to online, who you're chatting with, who you're getting involved with online. And I tell you why. Because I fight for child rights, and I fight to keep children alive. And there are so many child sexual predators out there. They will try to get a hold of children online. They do it all the time. It's in the newspaper. It's on the news. Children are dying at the hands of these people, these child sexual predators that get a hold of children. And where are they getting a hold of them? Online. Social networking. They set themselves up to be kids online, and they make friends saying, hey, I'm 12 years old or whatever, and they're actually adults, they're child sexual predators, and you just have to be very much aware of what you're doing online. So we're going to do a topic on online safety here pretty soon, because it's so important, and I think we'll try to get to that later this week sometime. But you can go online, just type into your browser child online safety, and you can pull up information regarding how to stay safe online. It is so important. Your safety is number one. So if you're under the age of 18, make sure that you have someone, just kind of listen in with you on this, and just make sure it's something that you should be listening to. And yes, I'm so glad you could be here. Thanks a lot for tuning in. We're going to get right into this Survivor to Thriver workbook, found again at the Adult Survivors of Child Abuse Morris Center program at www.ascasupport.org. And you can pull this workbook up and go through it with me if you want to. And we're on step 12. We were looking at step 12 on yesterday morning, actually, page 94. We went through most of it, and we got really pretty much through the whole thing, all the way to almost the professional help recommendations that they had there. And it's such a good step 12. It's I am facing my shame and developing self-compassion. And self-compassion, learning how to love ourselves, right? Learning how to feel good about ourselves. And if you experience child abuse of any kind, and as a child, we have to kind of go back and replace all that negative stuff that was done to us and said to us with positive stuff, like positive beliefs and positive affirmations, right? It is really important, because I had a very negative self-image from being told that I was worthless and useless and everything else. You name it, man. I was called it and told it on a regular basis, and my mom just couldn't help herself. She grew up like that, and that she just passed it on to us. So they did say that shame is a general term that encompasses all of survivors' negative feelings about themselves, and it is also the psychological source of self-sabotage. It says, unlike guilt, which is the result of feeling bad about what you do in the external world, shame reflects feelings of failure inside as a person. Shame is experienced as self-blame. You perceive yourself as flawed, inferior, contemptible, no good. And this is what happens when you're just told this over and over again, if you were told this as a child, right? Considering how little you probably received as a child, shame, like anger, is a normal feeling. The problem is that you may have too much of it. Shame is the part of you that you can't face because it is so intolerable. They said here, in the words of John Bradshaw, toxic shame is an emotion that gets internalized as a state of being. So it's like you just become this. If your parents tell you, oh, you're worthless, or oh, you're no good, or whatever they said, like my mom especially told me. My dad just kind of told me I was from the devil and I was evil, but my mom was more, you're just worthless and useless and a miserable child, right? Not wanted. I was told that quite a lot. And so I really felt unworthy and unwanted and just very, kind of bad about myself for so many years. And even though I could get along fine in society and no problem, had friends and stuff, I had a very low self-esteem, right? Adult survivors begin to internalize shame when they identify with parents who abuse them, abandon them, and fail to validate them as people. And they said here, the shame becomes part of a package of like self-blame, bad feelings, self-destructive thoughts, and self-sabotaging behaviors. And so this can happen, right? And this is what happens to children. We'll skip over some of this because we did read this. You can go back to my show from yesterday morning, and you can listen to that if you want to, or you can just pull up the Survivor to Thriver workbook and just read along step 12, page 94. And then they said here, considering that shame is probably deeply embedded in your sense of self, it will take a lot of courageous work to uncover it, examine it, and begin to transform it into self-acceptance. But it can be done. By working with your support network and sharing your feelings with other people whom you trust, you can begin to internalize a different, more accepting message about yourself. To continue self-blaming is to do to yourself as an adult what was done to you as a child, right? You must sever this legacy by changing what you say to yourself, how you treat yourself, and how you let others treat you. And this is so important. I mean, I swore up and down, I said, no one will abuse me ever again. I will not allow it. And I made that decision. It was a very conscious decision that I would not allow anyone to abuse me, whether it's a friend, a family member, a boyfriend, a husband. It didn't matter who it was, even a coworker. I will take no abuse from anyone. I deserve respect. I give respect, so I deserve to be treated with respect, as a normal human being should be. And so I decided, hey, I'm done with that. I'm taking no more abuse off of anyone. And that was a very conscious decision. I'm glad that I made it, because I absolutely, people know it, and so they treat me with respect because they know that I'm not putting up with it. And because I care about myself, and they see that. You know what I mean? But when I was younger, that wasn't necessarily the case. And so I always felt like I had to be standing up for myself. So I was always the one to be mean or rude first, so that I could make sure that I wasn't going to be the one to get hurt. And so it caused me to have a lot of problems at work, with relationships. I had problems with relationships because I was going to hurt them first before they hurt me. And I always made sure that I had an easy escape plan, a way out, especially when it came to being in a relationship with the man that I love so dearly, my sweetheart. And it was I just didn't trust anybody. And so it's sad that can happen, right? I had to take a look at my behavior and start to think about what I was doing to self-sabotage my life, and then wonder why I didn't have any friends. It's because I pushed them all away, right? And we have to take a look at these things and then change the way we feel about ourselves, change what we say to ourselves, and change how we treat ourselves, right? And how we let others treat us, right? We want to treat people how we want to be treated. And so, we have to learn to trust. I want to be trusted, so I had to learn to trust. All this stuff had to happen, right? It was a journey, let me tell you. It was a real big journey. And I'm still working on it. I really am. I'm still working on it, but I've come so far, but it's still, I still have things that I have to work on. And so their self-help portion was read any of several available books and articles on shame and its debilitating effects. Number 2, learn to identify the feeling of shame and as it occurs in your daily life, and write it in your journal about situations that trigger shame. And this way you can, if we were to do that, if we were to identify it, the feeling of it, and then write it down in our journal, we could kind of see what actually triggers it, and then we would learn how to deal with that, right? And number 3, reach out to others for help in learning to act differently in situations that trigger shame. By assertively affirming your strengths and admitting your weaknesses, you will counteract internal shame and arrest the shaming process in your everyday life. It says you will also begin to accept yourself, good parts and not so good ones, as a valuable person, right? Because nobody's perfect. And if you grew up in an abusive home, a lot of times we think, I've heard this from lots of survivors, that they had to be perfect, or they thought they had to be perfect, right? And because, to try to stop the abuse, it's like, if I was a better child, if I was perfect, my parents would love me, or they wouldn't have treated me that way, right? So many issues regarding that, and there's probably more surrounding that than even what I just mentioned there. It would be interesting to get right into that and actually study that. But, I'm not a perfectionist, but I'm really hard on myself. So if I make a mistake, it's because I don't want people to be mad at me, because my mother was continually mad at me. I mean, she was, when I got older, late teens, early 20s, she had kind of mellowed out. But when I was a really little kid, just growing up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 years old, she was just mad at me all the time, whether I did anything right or wrong. I just couldn't do anything right in her eyes. And so I was always kind of trying to work overtime to try to get her to love me. I'd write her poems, and, I scrubbed the floor one time, but I scrubbed it I waxed it too much, and then I got in trouble for that. And just things like that, nothing was ever good enough, and nothing was ever right with her or with me. So I was always trying to work overtime to try to get that, for her to not be mad at me. So if I made a mistake, it was, I kind of, she was very physically abusive towards me, so she would lash out at me whether I was good or bad. So, but if I made a mistake, I'd just be cringing, because I'd be like, I don't do anything wrong, and I get beat on. So then when I make a mistake and I get beat on, it was really quite scary to grow up around her. And, I had to learn when I got older that not everyone's out to get me. And as an adult, if I make a mistake and people get mad, they get mad. You know what I mean? Too bad. People make mistakes. And, I just have to, you try to learn from your mistakes, but people do make mistakes. Nobody's perfect, so I had to learn that. Number 4, recall the people in your childhood who had something good to say about you. What words did they use to describe your best qualities? And how did you feel when you were around them? revive these important people from your past by writing about them in your journal and exploring what their support meant to you and then and now. And this I did. I wrote a book. It's called A Life of Death, The Redemption, and you can grab it at Lulu if you want. All the proceeds are going to Dreamcatchers for Abused Children. It is my personal story, and I wrote it not out of revenge. I wrote it to help other survivors to see that they can keep going and that, just to keep reaching out for that hope, and that help where they can get it. I also wrote it to be a voice for the abused and for the voices that were silenced and who can't speak out for themselves. I wrote it for many, many reasons. I wrote it to break the silence. I wrote it to break my own silence and shame. I wrote it to tell my story so I wouldn't go to the grave with it. There were so many reasons why I wrote it and went public with it, and also because I want to do public speaking and I want to be able to tell people, yes, I survived child abuse, and yes, it hurts and it needs to stop. And so, I'm the only one in my family speaking out about this, right? Most of my siblings are dead, and if they're not saying a word. So, and that's their own prerogative. That's fine. But the thing is I had to do it because it was destroying me to keep silent like that. I couldn't handle it anymore, and I needed to get it out. I needed to tell my story, and really it was bothering me because my brothers went to their graves in silence, and so that's why I wrote my story. But you can pick it up at Lulu, and it's called A Life of Death, The Redemption, and you can grab it right off my Blog Talk Radio website, or you can get a hold of me. But anyway, I did recall the people that actually intervened on my behalf in that story, because this family became a huge proponent for me as far as making me realize that I did not deserve to be treated the way I was. Before I met them, I was so used to being battered by my mother that it was just part of the deal. And so when they actually intervened, because I went to their house after my mom had beat me up really pretty bad one time, and they said they were shocked, and they said, "Oh my God, you should go to the hospital. We need to report this." And I was just devastated. I did not want her to go to the police, and I was just like, "No, I really don't want any intervention done." So she went down to talk to my mother, and they worked it out that I could stay at their house for off and on, really for as long as it took, because they knew that I needed to be out of that house when my mom was overly stressed. So I actually spent almost a couple of years with them, living in their home, being one of their kids, doing my homework, being treated like a normal person, eating at the table with them. Nobody was fighting at mealtime. Nobody was battering each other. Nobody was beating up on the kids. There was no cursing and swearing, and the people weren't up all night trying to rape people. I mean, oh my God, the home I grew up in was just crazy. But anyway, these people were normal people. They were a normal family, and they were so, they were my example for how to live a normal life when I was 13 and a half, 14 years old. And I remember them. I will never forget them. I'll never forget the days that I spent in their home, and the love that I felt there. They really treated me like one of their own kids. And I saw them just a few years ago, actually, the parents, and it was just so awesome to see them again as an adult and be able to tell them thank you so much for what you did for me, because I tell you, it meant everything. And so it's good to recall people who, if you had someone in your life who actually did say something good about you, or how they made you feel, or did they describe your best qualities, how did you feel when you were around them? Because this is a very healing thing to do, to re-experience the good things that were that came out of your bad, abusive childhood, right? Those people, I'll never forget those people, and they are such a huge, part of the reason why I think I was able to make it and not kill myself and not self-harm and not self-injure, because I kept holding on to the words that they told me, and that was that I had to love myself. I was going to need to be able to forgive my parents eventually for myself. Not necessarily for my parents, but for me, because I was going to have to let the hatred go and the anger go. And because I saw these people right up into my 20s. And so, they had talked to me a lot about it, and they really helped me to work through stuff. Although I carried on a lot of anger in my 30s, because what my mother had told me just before I left to move to Canada, she had told me that we were really absolutely worth nothing to her. And I just couldn't believe that, because I thought, oh my God, after all the years of abuse and everything that she put us through, and then for her to go and say that we absolutely meant nothing to her really just broke my heart. And I left the country and got as far away from there as I could. But it kind of sent me into a downward spiral. I wasn't doing too bad up until that point, but it really sent me into like a 10-year spiraling kind of downwards, but internalized. I didn't really tell too many people about it. I told a couple people, and I lost these friends because they couldn't deal with my with my adult survivor issues. So really very hard. If you're struggling with this, make sure you reach out and get some help. Get a good counselor, a good therapist. I've met some since I've started reaching out that are just so awesome, and they just want the best for people. They want people to heal. They want people to feel so good about themselves and to really learn to love themselves. It's so important. And they said here, number 5, those of you who are religious or spiritual can turn to your higher power to cleanse yourself of the shame and unworthiness that you feel so deeply. Religion and spiritual practice can be tremendous sources of inner sustenance and can provide an ideal vision to replace the negative role models and scenarios of the past. Share your struggle with, and then also number 6, share your struggle with working this step at ASCA meetings. So if you were attending the ASCA meetings, some of the cities actually host ASCA meetings in North America. I know my city doesn't, but there's online support, peer support, group support. You can check out their website, and you can just see for yourself if they are hosting an ASCA meeting in your city, and you could join. I know I would if they were here. Their professional help recommendations were, number 1, in order to resolve shame, you need to have an ongoing reparative relationship with another person who will help you challenge your internal voice of shame and replace it with a healthier dialogue. It says your therapist is an important ally in helping you to transform the shame into self-acceptance. Talk about your shame with him or her and share how you experience shame in your life, including your therapy sessions. So that's just so important, right, to have someone to talk to and to help us turn that voice of shame into a healthy voice, of self-worth and self-love instead of self-loathe, I used to have a lot of self-loathing, and I just couldn't stand my own skin. I couldn't stand to be in my own body, and I just had a lot of problems with it. I was just so mistreated when I was little, and it just carried on. And so had I really reached out and got some help, I would have been a lot further along. I really believe that. It wouldn't have taken me so long to get where I am today. I really believe that. I like to believe that I can trust people, and I like to believe that I could have maybe found a therapist or a counselor to talk to about this stuff years and years ago. So that's just the thing. I think we just need to keep reaching out. And, if you find a therapist and they don't seem to be trustworthy, use your gut instinct. If they're not, and they're not working for you, get another one. Just absolutely, you have to be really you have to be the biggest part of your healing. You know what I mean? It has to be your empowerment, your journey, right? You have to sort of empower yourself to take control of your healing. We were reading some of that here in the Survivor to Thriver workbook maybe a few weeks ago. One of these chapters were actually about that. And we have to be in control of our healing and decide what's best for us. It's the best thing to do. But we just sometimes need help to do that. And so, if you can find a good counselor or therapist, that's great. If I could afford one, I would go. And so, but right now I'm just relying on group support, which is great because it is very helpful to have someone to talk to, right? Number 2, with your therapist's help, identify the ways in which you keep yourself from feeling your shame by adopting a role of false self that you portray to others. Share this false self with your therapist and try to understand what the role gives you that you feel you lack inside. So I guess you can identify the ways in which you keep yourself from feeling your shame by adopting a role of false self that we portray to others. So yeah, like if we walk around and we don't actually acknowledge who our true self is, right? But we just present this picture of false self, which is like, oh, I'm just fine, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm feeling great, just because we're just so unwanting or unready to share, our pain with others and to share what's going on inside of ourselves. That was me for a long time. Of course, I wasn't really necessarily maybe being false about it. I lost so many friends over it. I thought, man, maybe I better just shut up and stop talking about it because I'm losing all my friends. Because as soon as I would mention it, they'd be gone. So, yeah, I guess you do develop a bit of a false self. I know, I wanted to be as honest as possible when I wrote my story and as honest as possible doing this work because I want to stop child abuse and I want to be a voice for the voiceless. I want to be a voice for the children whose voices were silenced because they were murdered at the hands of their parents and caregivers, and I want to be a voice for people like my brothers who committed suicide and did drug overdose and basically killed themselves because the abuse that they suffered, right? I want to be their voice, right? I want to be the children's today's voices, these children out here who are being abused right now. I want to be their voice too, right? And so it's just so important, right, to not have a false self when you're doing that. I wanted to be able to present myself to the public eye just for exactly who I am. And I thought, I can't come out just pretending that everything is great and I'm just fine and I never experienced one bit of abuse, but I'm going to fight for the abused, you know what I mean? I thought, no, I'm going to be honest and I'm going to share every single detail that I can possibly recall to anybody who's willing to listen. Because we need to stop child abuse. Silence is really the main issue, I really believe it. Because it's always pushed under the carpet. No one wants to deal with it. Families don't want to deal with it because that means the abuser has to be held accountable. And then they have to stop what they're doing. And of course, nobody wants to do that. They're very manipulative abusers, right? So, I mean, they certainly want to continue on with what they're doing. It's really unfortunate. And people who were abused, it's so shaming. It's such a hard thing to face, just to have to even face it ourselves, to look at ourselves in the mirror and face it. And I did that, and I thought, man, I did not deserve that. And I started to realize that I counted and I did matter, and that all child abuse survivors do matter. All the victims that are gone now from thousands of years of people mistreating and killing their children, they counted. We all counted. And none of us deserve to be treated this way. And it's so painful and it hurts, And so I'm just going to continue talking until I just can't talk anymore, until the one day I finally just drop and I just can't talk anymore. That's fine. But I'm going to continue on talking until, because I want to be just one more voice out there with all the others that are out there saying we have to stop child abuse. We have to look at ways within our communities and look at these groups who are actually making some progress and then support them, back them up. You know what I mean? Instead of looking at what's wrong, let's look at what's right and actually back it up. We got to look at what is working and go from there, because otherwise we're just not going to get anywhere. And so I really believe, if there's some group in your community who's doing some great work for child abuse prevention and, to stop child abuse, it's such a good idea to get involved, family violence, different things like that, anything that just is helping to make a difference. And because I know resources are limited and time is limited too, but as long as we try to do whatever we can in our own capacity, I think that's great, right? So we got step 13. We're not even going to have time to look at this tonight, but we'll go over this Wednesday. Step 13 is, I accept that I have the right to be who I want to be and live the way I want to live. And that's quite a long chapter. And we'll go through that. And then the next portion after that is step 14. I am able to grieve my childhood and mourn the loss of those who failed me. That's very important. So we'll take a look at that too. I don't know if we'll get to that Wednesday, but we'll just keep working through. So you can grab this workbook. I'm really, think it's some great material, and you can just check it out yourself there if you can't catch the next shows. And you can always come back and listen to the archives if you really want to. Thanks so much for tuning in. We got about 2 minutes left. And I'm the excuse me, my voice is terrible. I'm the Canada Regional Director for Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, and I'm so happy to stand with them. Let me tell you, I just haven't really been this happy ever in my entire lifetime, because it's allowed me to stand up and take part in something that is just it is making a huge difference, and it's going to continue to make a huge difference for children's lives. These children out here are being abused right now. We have to stop child abuse. So you can check their website out, www.dreamcatchersforabusedchildren.com. Check out what they do. They do all kinds of stuff. They're aware. They are really promoting awareness, education, prevention of child abuse. They're a 501c3 not-for-profit organization. They work with law enforcement. They work with people who work with children, for instance, nurses, counselors, teachers, and whatnot, to provide information regarding signs and symptoms, what to look for, really basically teaching people how to look for the signs and symptoms and how to report child abuse. They have all kinds of links and resources on there for survivors of child abuse. There's all kinds of links on there for parents who are having a hard time and they don't want to abuse their children, and they think, hey, I need to get help, right? Well, there's all kinds of links and resources there. Just check it out. And April is the National Child Abuse Awareness Month, and Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, of course, works 12 months a year, all year long, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There'll be somebody working for Dreamcatchers, volunteer, Dreamcatchers for Abused Children, to help stop child abuse. Well, we're joining in, and we have all kinds of interesting information on the website regarding that. And you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, everywhere, and MySpace. And yeah, check us out. There's some great information there regarding child abuse and how to report it, and that you have to report it. You know, an abused child is not a happy child, so you don't have to worry about breaking up a happy home. And if you suspect abuse, it's the law. You have to report child abuse. It is the law. And we have to do it out of really just to be doing the right thing. We have to report it. You suspect child abuse, report it. It's so important. You could save a child's life. Thanks for tuning in. Tomorrow night, blogtalkradio.com. Dreamcatchers has their own Blog Talk radio show. It's Dreamcatchers Talk Radio, and that is www.blogtalkradio.com/Dreamcatchers. And we're on at 6:30 Eastern Time, Eastern Standard Time, and that's Donna Shear. She's the president, and she's a best-selling author, and she's hosting, and I'll be co-hosting. I hope you can tune in 6:30 Eastern Standard Time. And yeah, tell me if you need more information. Have a great night, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.